professor of pathology and a former consultant to the National Health Service in the UK. And he has been writing moral clarity and medical clarity throughout this lockdown. He writes, among other places, for The Spectator, which I have a paid subscription to because I want to support The Spectator. The latest is 10 Reasons to End the Lockdown Now. Dr. Lee, welcome to the Dennis Prager Show.
Thank you. Good morning.
Oh, that was very thoughtful of you to wish me a good morning because it's good evening where you are. So I
stay on the ball.
You're on the ball, exactly. Where were you a professor of pathology?
I was a professor at the Hull York Medical School, which is a medical school in the UK based between the city of Hull and the city of York.
Yes, I know a bit about the area. I went, for 1 year, I studied at the University of Leeds.
All right, yes, so not so far away.
Right, exactly. Anyway, thank you for your work. Are you getting a lot of pushback because you obviously don't represent the medical community's views?
I'm not sure that's true, to be honest with you. I mean, I think the views that we're seeing on the mainstream media are not necessarily the views that are bubbling around below the surface. And obviously the medical community that are most visible, I guess, here and in the United States are the official advisors to the government. And of course, official advisors to government, tend to have the views that they tend to have, which are often cautious and committee-driven, and as we know from, I guess, past experience of lots of things, not necessarily in tune with the real world.
Were you, from the beginning, skeptical of the lockdown?
To be honest, I was. The reason being that when you have a new disease, a new epidemic coming, there's a thing called ascertainment bias, and it means you always spot the worst cases first. So, the people who have a new disease who are pretty well, they don't turn up in the statistics, whereas the people who get a new disease and they're really ill go to ITU where it's spotted. So because the testing is then developed on the hoof in hospital settings, it seems to suggest that a new disease is a very serious, awful thing, and the numbers that were coming out of Wuhan in China did suggest that. But as time has gone by, we can see that, in fact, this is a much, it's still a nasty disease, don't get me wrong, it's still a nasty disease, but it's a much less dangerous disease than it seemed to be to start with. So whereas initially it seemed to be some sort of existential threat, now we can just see that it's a nasty virus within the range of other nasty viruses we've survived in the past without doing the lockdown.
So had you been the decider in the UK from the beginning, what would you have said to Boris Johnson?
Well, I think all our politicians had a difficult job to do. Obviously, they have a difficult job to do. Who would want to do their job? But the thing is, when the pictures were coming out of China and then Italy and Spain and New York City of crowded ITUs and lots of people getting this disease simultaneously, you can see that there was a great pressure on politicians to do something. And at that stage, based on pretty imperfect data, but at that stage, there was a great worry that this was a very serious disease. So I think one can understand why lockdown was, why we did lockdown to start with. But now weeks have gone by, and I think we have a clearer view of what this virus really is and what it's doing. And it seems to me that in the same way that we changed policy to go into lockdown, we should now be changing it to come out. But of course, once people have convinced themselves that the sky's falling, it's actually quite hard to then reverse it. But I think that's where we are now.
What are the plans in Britain to open up?
Well, they're very limited at the moment. We have a strange situation here where the 4 different countries in Great Britain, England, Scotland, Wales and Ireland, are all doing slightly different things. But in England, where I live, we're going to be allowed to go out and do a bit more exercise, but they're still very keen for us to stay socially distanced and not meet up with more than one other person from your household, and you can't do team sports, and the restaurants are all closed, and the cinemas are closed, and a lot of the things that make people's life worth living, for example, seeing their grandchildren, these are still difficult. So, there's a very slight easing, but personally I'd like to see it go further faster, because I think we could.
Okay, we're going to continue in a moment. What makes radio possible in America is commercials, so forgive me. I always have to explain to my non-American guests.